My name's Brandon and this is Cartoon Network Video Game History, a show where I take a look back on all the video games based on Cartoon Network shows and retrospectively review them. This week on Cartoon Network Video Game History, we're going backwards to a game I accidentally missed. In fact, I only ever discovered this game's existence because I was looking up how many Cartoon Network games were still left on Steam. Without doing that, I probably never would have found it. There are very minimal mentions of this game on the internet, to the point where even the Adventure Time wiki doesn't have a proper entry for it. Today I'm reviewing Adventure Time, Finn and Jake's Epic Quest. Coincidentally, the backstory for this game is a bit of an epic quest in itself.
Okay, that was epic.
Finn and Jake's Epic Quest actually started out as a free web game available via Cartoon Network's website. Classic Brandon, always being a hypocrite by reviewing mobile and web games despite saying he would never do that, right? Well, hold your horses before you start screeching in the comments section. Even in its free web game form, Finn and Jake's Epic Quest was a little different. Instead of just playing it directly on the website, you had to download and install Unity Web Player in order to actually access the game. The game was officially released on November 29, 2012, and despite these extra steps, Cartoon Network boasted that it had 1.3 million players in its first week and 16 million players in the following 2 years. It's safe to say it was pretty popular. Cartoon Network's next step was a little unorthodox. On March 27 of 2014, Cartoon Network sent out a press release announcing that Adventure Time Finn and Jake's Epic Quest would be getting a Steam release.
Epic.
This wasn't just any old Steam release though. This version of the game was being remade from the ground up. Finn and Jake's Epic Quest would receive a graphical overhaul, a new combat system, a brand new world to explore, animated cutscenes, and a refinement of the general controls. It seems like Cartoon Network was pumping a fair bit of money into this, which isn't too shocking seeing how popular the free version was. To compensate for what was essentially a brand new game, players would have to purchase this version of Finn and Jake's Epic Quest. I'm not entirely sure who developed the original game, but the remake was handled by NGD Studios, a developer based out of Argentina. NGD Studios are a bit of an unknown quantity. In 2019 they rebranded as Nimble Giant Entertainment, when former Rockstar executive and notorious piece of shit Geronimo Barrera was hired as their vice president. Nimble Giant haven't developed many notable games. In fact, I'd say they've made 0 notable games. The only title I recognise in their history is Quantum League, which looks promising, but it hasn't even released yet. A couple of weeks after the game's announcement, it was released on Steam and seemingly almost immediately forgotten, which is actually kinda crazy because it's one of the few Adventure Time games you can still legitimately purchase. Heck, even Nimble Giant's Wikipedia page and website make no mention of working on this game. There's mention of an apparent Atomic Betty mobile game, but not even a single acknowledgement that they developed this. So how did the very first remake in Cartoon Network video game history do with critics? Well, the game doesn't have a Metascore, but from the 3 reviews it has, the response seems mixed. It managed to nab a 7, as well as a 5.5 and a 4. Interestingly, fans seem to enjoy it a lot. The user score on Metacritic is a 7.1, while 74% of the game's 300 plus Steam reviews are positive. The backstory to Finn and Jake's Epic Quest is utterly fascinating to me. Let's hope the game itself is just as good. But before I jump into my analysis, it's that time again to remind you to subscribe. Cartoon Network video game history is coming to a close and Nickelodeon video game history is on the horizon. I've got some really amazing stuff planned that you won't want to miss. But now, on with the review. So last week I spoke about how everyone involved with making Finn and Jake Investigations was boasting about how it was the first ever Adventure Time game in 3D, but that it actually wasn't true. Well, as you can see, that claim isn't true because this game exists. It seems like even Cartoon Network themselves would like people to forget this game was a thing that happened. Seriously, if you go back and look at a lot of the marketing they did for Finn and Jake Investigations, you'll see so many examples of them using the 3D as a massive selling point. It's just a truly bizarre situation. Even the page for this game on the Adventure Time wiki is almost entirely dedicated to the original web game. The Steam release gets one tiny paragraph, despite being a brand new thing. That's like if the people working on the Final Fantasy wiki saw Final Fantasy VII Remake and decided to give it a small footnote on the original game's page. However, once you actually start playing Finn and Jake's Epic Quest, you can start to see why this game has been buried, and in particular, why they were acting like Finn and Jake Investigations was the first 3D game. I criticised Investigations for its graphical style, but it's a million times more polished than what we got here. The in-game graphics are okay, but the cutscenes look extremely dated. I've seen PS2 era Cartoon Network games that looked more polished. The actual gameplay is totally unique compared to what we've seen previously from Adventure Time. I'd say the closest comparison to what we've reviewed so far is the Ben 10 beat-em-ups. Here you control Finn and Jake as you journey through 4 different worlds, smiting enemies and collecting coins. Each world you travel through has 7 different levels, the last of which is always a boss battle. Your overall goal is to collect a bunch of artifacts throughout your adventures, however, not every level features an artifact. In fact, there are only 2 or 3 artifacts in each world, and there's never more than 1 artifact to find in a level, which means many levels don't have a major goal. There are additional side missions, but not every level has one, which basically means there are a whole bunch of times where your only purpose is to sprint to the next level's portal. Even when you are presented with a side mission, these aren't too interesting. For the most part, you're just asked to collect a certain amount of items in the level, or slay a certain number of a specific enemy. The rewards for these side missions never felt too enticing. You might get some gold, Enchiridion pages, and XP, but the lure of those rewards often wasn't strong enough to make me want to hang around any longer than I had to. Exploring levels is fraught with danger. As you might have noticed, each level is floating up in the clouds. When a ledge is not fenced off, the player can actually plummet off the edge. Rather than fall to your death, you actually get sent back to the previous level. God, I hated this. To be fair, you're sent to the end portal of the previous level, but having to trek back to where you were is a major pain in the ass, especially because falling off the side always felt so cheap. There are even moments where the game will strand the player on an island, or you'll get stuck, forcing the player to jump off the side to continue. Going back to the Enchiridion pages I mentioned though, these are what spice up the gameplay. So you've got your basic combat gameplay, which I'll touch on in more depth, but the icing on that cake is the special powers you get from Enchiridion pages. These pages are most commonly found scattered around levels, but they can also be purchased at various stages via Choose Goose. The effects of the pages vary wildly. Maybe you'll get a page that just gives you more coins, or maybe you'll get something that allows you to sneak past enemies. You've also got various traversal-based pages, allowing you to fly to disconnected islands, float through water, or just move at a vastly quicker pace. What you'll probably be using most often are the pages that give you new attacking abilities. I will admit, the developers went all in on these combat pages. There are so many options, and most of them are references to the show that fans will certainly enjoy. They also make encounters with run-of-the-mill enemies much more bearable. I found that a lot of the basic enemies can actually take way too long to destroy, so having these powers in your back pocket is a godsend. Unfortunately, this game does something that I absolutely hate here. Some of the scrolls can impact you negatively. The first time you pick up a scroll, it'll be a mystery until you actually use it, which means it's impossible to avoid these moments where you're tricked into summoning extra enemies, or my favourite, the scroll that randomizes all of your currently held scrolls. I absolutely despise games that have a mechanic that you are basically forced to use that then slips in a random negative drawback like this that you really can't control. It feels so frustrating for the game to penalise you in this way. The first time the game randomized and hid all of my scrolls, I genuinely considered just not even bothering with them again. That's how frustrating it was. As I mentioned, Finn and Jake gain XP throughout their battles and will level up. As far as I could tell, the actual act of leveling up doesn't do anything. Once you reach a specific level, you can go see Billy to upgrade your sword, but the general leveling up didn't seem to make me any stronger against enemies. The combat in Finn and Jake's epic quest is, again, pretty basic stuff, but it feels a lot more enjoyable to control than any other title I've played so far. You've got your typical light and heavy attacks, and you can pull off combos with specific button presses too. Additionally, Finn and Jake have their own unique abilities. If you're controlling Finn, you can perform a dodge roll, while pressing the same button as Jake will bring out a shield. The AI Finn and Jake also help you out in combat, but they might as well not even be there most of the time. Generally, they just hang around and watch you do all the work, very rarely chipping in the most minimal of damage. It's not saying much, but this is the most enjoyable combat has been in Adventure Time. It's just a shame that fighting enemies can be a bit of a slog and also feels ultimately pointless most of the time. Combat really isn't all that necessary in this game. You can run past every basic enemy in this game without issue, as your only concern is heading to the end goal and grabbing an artifact along the way if there's one present. Fighting enemies is only necessary if you want to level up or collect coins. Coins are basically only used to purchase Enchiridion pages, but you'll find so many scattered around or hidden in treasure chests that purchasing them really isn't necessary. Similarly, leveling up isn't all that necessary, as you don't actually have to fight if you don't want to. You might be thinking, well, surely the mandatory boss battles are a good reason to force players to engage with the combat and level up. And yeah, you're sort of right. Going up against these bosses at level 1 would probably be tough, but the Enchiridion page gimmick helps out majorly. 3 of the 4 boss battles, which includes the final boss battle, were laughably easy. You'll mass so many Enchiridion pages that you can just spam them in the boss battle and make it a breeze. Once you figure out that the Fiona and Cake and Jake armor scrolls are ridiculously OP, you'll start hoarding them for the finale of every world. When you have those scrolls, it doesn't matter what level you are. Bosses are going to crumble beneath your power. The one boss battle that wasn't a complete breeze was actually the very first. Fighting off the Garden Witch was a massive pain because of how tedious and clunky the battle is. She constantly teleports all over the place at random, dragging the fight out forever. There's absolutely no flow to the design here, and it had me dreading the rest of the boss battles. But after that, they were all pretty simple, mostly resulting in me just mashing the attack button a bunch. The final boss battle with Death was the worst for this. My hand and arm were literally starting to cramp up from all the mashing required. The combat and boss battles aren't the only tedious aspect of this game though. Just like the game gives you no incentive to engage the basic enemies, it also gives you absolutely no incentive to explore its ridiculously large levels. While this title may have been based on a web game and is actually kind of small in scope, some of the levels here are massive. They can sprawl on for miles and miles and are basically laid out with no rhyme or reason, making the levels where you need to find an artifact an arduous task. I lost count of how many times I wandered past the end goal a few minutes in, but needed to spend what felt like decades wandering around pretty boring landscapes in an attempt to find some trinket. You're genuinely tasked with finding a needle in a haystack. Keeping track of where you've been is not easy, as the game only provides you with a minimap. If you had the ability to check the full layout, or even better, you had a map that slowly reveals itself as you go to new areas, things would be a lot easier. Instead, you explore locations that all look exactly the same in the hope that you stumble upon what you need, and then hope to God you memorize the way back to the portal. I appreciate the ambition to create these large levels, but Nimble Giant doesn't give the player any incentive to explore. As I explained, engaging in combat really isn't necessary, and you'll get more scrolls than you could possibly ever utilize just by legging it to the end portal every level. A lot of effort went into creating these environments that most people are just going to brush over. As has basically become the theme of the Adventure Time series of video games, there is yet another brilliant soundtrack to accompany the journey. This has honestly been one of the most exciting developments in Cartoon Network video game history. Sure, the games might not be firing on all cylinders, but having a high quality score makes things a lot easier to stomach. A lot of the earlier Cartoon Network games had dreadful soundtracks, so it's important to reflect on just how good we have it with these more modern releases. I was actually expecting there to not be any record of these tracks on the internet, but thankfully the great work of YouTube user Q has managed to preserve it. This is another game where I'd recommend just listening to the soundtrack.
Huh? What the glug's going on?
Crud, dude. Did we get sucked inside BMO again?
No, man. Look, the entire land of Ooh has been turned into a video game.
Awesome!
Oh, yeah! Ka-ching!
Unfortunately, the backstory of Finn and Jake's
Epic.
quest is a lot more epic than the game itself. There are nuggets of good ideas and interesting design here, but the whole package really misses the mark. I'll give Nimble Giant a bit of credit. For what is essentially a remake of a web game, there's a lot going on here, particularly with the gigantic levels and the amount of Enchiridion abilities to discover. It's just a pity none of it combines together to make something that is very interesting or fun. After playing it from start to finish, it's pretty clear why this game has been basically buried and forgotten. It also probably doesn't help that the younger demographic of people who would watch Adventure Time aren't exactly known for being PC gamers. It's one thing to get a kid to play a free game on CartoonNetwork.com, basically every kid does that, but a kid is less likely to have a Steam account ready to play this. Kids are getting a lot more tech savvy, but for the time being I'd say a considerable percentage of them only game on consoles or mobile. It begs the question why this game was left to be a PC exclusive. It could have easily been on every console, and heck, I think there probably would have been a way to adapt it to mobile devices too. As I basically already stated, I wouldn't recommend Finn and Jake's Epic Quest. The game is like $10 on Steam, or $15 if you're in Australia, which seems like a steep price for a glorified free web game that takes 3 to 4 hours to beat. I'm pretty sure this paid version actually features less content than the free version. From what I've seen on the Adventure Time wiki, the web game version has more worlds to play through compared to the paid version. Why they didn't include these, I have no idea. Next time I'll be taking a look at another Adult Swim game. Pocket Morty's is the first full-fledged Rick and Morty game, and yes, it's a mobile game. I remember this game garnering quite a lot of popularity back when it was released, so it'll be interesting to see what it's like for myself. If you don't want to miss out on that review and future reviews of Cartoon Network Battle Crashes, Steven Universe, Ben 10, OKKO, and eventually Samurai Jack, make sure you're subscribed.
Music is powerful, man. It speaks to a primal pit in our brains. It makes anyone want to get up and get their knees going. Gotta get him pumping, pumping, pumping. Boom, 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 boom.
Epic.